So today we were going to talk to you a little bit about double tonguing, multiple articulation in general, and if we can jump off this screen here. We'll just get straight to it since we don't have a ton of time, you know. So what is double tonguing? Well, some of you may know how to do it. Some of you may do it quite a bit. Some of you may be new to it, and that's fine. There are various ways of executing a multiple articulation technique. The way that we do it, the way that we teach it is using an alternation of syllables like dugu, 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 or tiki, tiki, tiki. And we'll talk a little bit more about those syllables later. And you know, the whole reason why we do this is to increase the speed or our articulation ability, because you know everybody has different limits, and you know, sometimes depending on what rep you're playing, you might need to articulate faster than your single tongue is capable of doing, and that's where multiple articulation comes in. It effectively, well, it drastically increases your articulation speed. You know, theoretically, we can double our single articulation speed. So, you know, if we're comfortable at 120, 16th notes at 120 single tongue, then, you know, again, theoretically, when everything's nice and efficient, then, you know, we can double tongue at 240, which should be sufficient for most needs. And, you know, a lot of contemporary rep is assuming, composers are assuming that people are going to be familiar with various techniques that were once considered extended and contemporary. But I think we're getting to the point where a lot of these techniques they're becoming a standard part of what we need to be able to do as clarinetists. And ultimately, articulation is like any other aspect of technique. It serves our artistic interests, our artistic decision-making, our artistic contribution to a performance. And, you know, we get to make decisions based on what we want to get out of that performance and our interpretation. And articulation it's not just a on or off thing. There's a lot of variation and a lot of decision making that we can explore to add to that interpretation. So today we're also going to go through some steps for either your first attempts at multiple articulation or double tonguing, and then steps to push that so that it becomes a standard part of your technique toolbox. We're going to talk about common problems and solutions, and there are some very common issues, and we have various solutions to address each. Greetings, Jorge from Panama. Welcome. So we wanted to get started by sharing with you just a short little excerpt of an arrangement that Stefanie and I recorded, and it is Halloween themed, so pardon the attire, somewhat odd in February, but this was an arrangement done by a good friend of ours of the violin showpiece, Round of the Goblins, and he arranged it for clarinet and bass clarinet, and you know, instead of a solo accompaniment role, we wanted him to write something incredibly unique and something that highlights both instruments. And this is just a short little excerpt that we thought would be representative of the technique that we're talking about today. So I will play this. So we got to have fun, right? And we had a lot of fun making that. This was uh, a product of our being stuck at home and needing to do something creative over the pandemic. And fortunately, we were, we're lucky enough to live with one another and be able to collaborate in all kinds of cool projects. And we actually enjoyed doing these videos. So even though we were in person where we teach and we were doing live concerts, we still enjoy making these videos. So but yeah, so that's an example of something that absolutely requires, well, I mean, for me, I can't singleton that fast, requires multiple articulation, and it gives a lot of freedom for what you can do. Now, that's not like standard literature by any means, but it's fun. And, sometimes you just got to do stuff for fun. Okay, so we have two types of articulation in double tonguing. We have an anterior articulation, and that's when the tip of the tongue touches the tip of the reed. It is exactly the same as single tonguing. It's no different whatsoever. Ideally, it's no different. If it is, then we'll talk. The other is a posterior articulation. That's when the back of the tongue touches the roof of the mouth. It interrupts the air, not the reed. So like when we're single tonguing, we touch the reed, we interrupt the reed, it stops the sound or it interrupts the sound, and then we start it again. And we do this, in a cycle. So with multiple articulation, where the back of the tongue's touching the roof of the mouth and it just bumps the air. And that causes a lot of problems, right? It causes a lot of problems for voicing, it causes a lot of problems because we're interrupting the air. And the big thing is that we have two types of articulation. We have one where we're touching the reed, and we have another where we're bumping the air. So there's a lot of opportunity for things to not sound the same. And we're going to talk a lot about that, because ideally we don't want double tonguing to sound any different than single tonguing. And it's no easy task, but it is absolutely a feasible one. So wanted to show you just really quickly what this actually looks like. So I run a lab at Arizona State University. I have an ultrasound machine in this lab, and I'm able to look at the tongue and see what in the world the tongue's doing. And this is a clarinetist's tongue doing some slow double tonguing. And what you see here, I know it looks kind of abstract at the moment, but imagine that you're looking at the surface of the tongue from the side, where, can you all see my cursor? Great. Where this white line is the surface of the tongue. This is the front of the tongue, so like the tip. This is the back of the tongue. And this whole mass here is the tongue. But the white line, that's what we're interested in. And we can see what in the world it's doing when we're double tonguing. All right, so let me just go through this slowly. So the tongue goes forward a little bit and touches the reed, and then it comes back and touches the roof of the mouth. Then it comes forward and touches the reed, and then it comes back a little bit and goes up and touches the roof of the mouth. And it does this very, very rapidly. I'll play it one more time from the beginning. I didn't include a video of single tonguing, but I can tell you, it does not look at all like that. There's far less motion. The back of the tongue's not moving much at all. So it's a really unique tongue motion. Okay, so as we start to talk about steps to learning how to do this, what's really critical, and this is beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about today because we don't have time, but because half of multiple articulation is single articulation, we got to make sure that our single tonguing is correct, which means we're using the tip of the reed or the tip of the tongue touching the tip of the reed. And there are various ways to make sure that you're doing that. but if there's some problems with the single tonguing in terms of the technique execution, it can cause some trouble when we start double tonguing. That said, though, if everything's correct, I've heard people told me, well, doesn't double tonguing mess up your single tonguing? It's like, no, if you make sure that you're not changing anything, multiple articulation can actually make your single tonguing better because you learn how to relax. And your tongue is a set of 9 muscles and they all interact with one another. And if they're all tense, it can cause a lot of problems. Okay, so as a group, we're going to try some stuff. And we're going to do this without the clarinet first, just so we get used to the tongue motion. And you just keep yourself muted. Okay, so without the horn, I want you to vocalize these syllables: do, goo, do, goo, and try to do it rhythmically. Pick a nice slow pulse. Do, goo, do, goo, do, goo, do, goo, do, goo, do, goo, do. Good. Now I want to emphasize the importance of not changing the vowel. So we don't want to do like dooga, 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 or doogie, 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 anything like that, because that will cause voicing problems. If we think of voicing, vowel shapes are not exactly how we voice because they're 2 completely different contexts. But if we think of the shape of the vocal tract that creates a vowel as being similar to the shape of the vocal tract that creates the necessary voicing we use across the range of the horn, when we change the vowel, we're essentially changing the voicing. Even though they're not identical and the tongue motion and the oral cavity shape may be different, we want to avoid changing it altogether. So let's go back and say these syllables one more time, and maybe just a little bit faster. So do goo do goo do goo do goo do goo do goo do. And if you feel like you're getting tired, try to relax and maybe only do like do goo do goo do do goo do goo do. So just 1 beat of 16th notes. Okay, now as you get more comfortable, try it faster. Do goo do goo do 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 do goo do goo do. And you might find you run into a limit, and that's okay. We all have limits. It's important to know where they are. So you can also change the syllable. So that's double tonguing. We can change to a triple subdivision and do do goo 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 do. That's one way of triple tonguing. Some people do do goo do do goo do do. I don't like doing that because it's 2 single articulations in a row. So if we try, let's everybody try the triple pattern. So do goo 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 do goo. Only in a clarinet meeting would we be making these sounds. Now that might trip you up a little bit, and that's okay. When we're practicing, tripping ourselves up can be a really, really good exercise. Okay, now the problem with using vowels and vocalizing, the problem with using vowels is that we're using, or speaking, we're using a significantly less air than we are when we're playing. Speaking is low, it's a low pressure activity unless we're like screaming, which we're not going to do today. It's too early here. So we need to kind of figure out what that feels like using air that we would be using when we're playing. So I want you to try without using the vocal cord. So you're not going to be pronouncing any syllables. I want you to do the same tongue motion just with air. So it's going to sound like, and try to keep that same vowel shape as you do this. Does it feel a little different? Does it feel like you maybe have like like your tongue gets stuck on your the roof of your mouth a little bit, and it's not quite as legato as it was when you're saying do goo or do goo. Sorry, I stick with double do goo versus. It's actually it's quite a bit more difficult to keep it legato when you're using a lot of air, but it's absolutely critical when we put it to the horn. That's one of the biggest problems, that we try to make it too staccato. And at double tonguing speeds, we don't need to be thinking short. It's too fast. Okay, so we've gotten used to the tongue motion. We've gotten used to using a lot of air with that tongue motion. So essentially articulating the air. So let's try doing some exercises. So I'm going to turn my metronome on and I will play, and you can play along with me. Make sure my reed is not completely dried out. We actually had rain out here in the desert for the first time in, I don't know, several months. Stefanie, do you remember? I don't even remember the last time it rained.
I think it was like October or something last time.
Rained all day Wednesday. So, oh yeah, absolutely, Dan. When you're vocalizing, you run out of air a lot sooner, just because you're using a lot more, and using a lot of air is incredibly important. That's a good thing, and it might be that you're using more air. You're using more air than you would while playing too. So I'm going to set my metronome to 90. Now this is a slow tempo. Jason just asked, would you recommend using a lighter reed when learning? Maybe, maybe not. It depends. Sometimes lighter reeds can be really problematic, and then sometimes harder reeds can be really problematic. I would recommend using a reed that is just comfortable, not going one extreme or the other. So I'm going to set my metronome to, actually, you know what? Let's do 80. So this is slow, and that's fine. We have to have a good starting point. So just a little bit. Okay, so let's take a look at our first exercise. So this is reminiscent of exactly what we were just doing with the syllables. Do goo do goo do, do goo do goo do, and we're going to put it to the clarinet. We're not moving the fingers with the articulation. We're just going to go down chromatically, and we can keep on going beyond where this is. So let's give it a shot. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so you notice I'm not trying to use a really short articulation. It's actually quite legato, and that kind of comes from my just overall approach to articulation, focusing on legato and then gradually moving to staccato. And the reason is we have to relax for legato. We can't be overly tense, and with multiple articulation, we're going to be at speeds that you will not be able to do if you're tense. So you learn how to relax with a nice legato articulation. You minimize how much time the tongue's on the reed. You minimize how much time the tongue is touching the roof of the mouth, and you end up with a really flexible articulation. I find it easier to make things shorter than it is to make things longer. So you focus on the longer stuff, at least initially. You focus on as long of or as legato of articulation as possible at first, and it tends to free things up. Okay, so we'll not do exercise number 2 right now because that's just going up, and we're going to address that in exercise number 6 on the next slide. But there are two factors of articulation that you have to keep in mind. There's speed and endurance. Speed is important, obviously, because we need to be able to articulate at various speeds. But endurance is also a factor, and those two interact. So if you think of your speed and your endurance kind of coming up together on a scale, as you get faster, your endurance tends to lag behind. It's very much like endurance sports, right? The faster you go, the faster your pace, the more exhausting it can be. So we have to be really careful with that. And this is an opportunity for us to work on endurance and combining with speed. But then when you don't have the endurance to do all 9 articulations in a row, then you can go back to exercise number 1 and do fewer. So less endurance so you can push your speed. Okay, so let's try a little bit faster. So we'll just jump up to 90. This is unfair. We're adding endurance and speed. Okay, so let's try exercise number 3. So it's the same thing. We're going to start on E, and we're gonna work our way down. We may not go all the way down to low E. Okay, 1, 2. So I just want to stop real quick and just bring up something that I thought about while I was playing. You drive the air all the way through. Air, like, it's a wind instrument. Air is the most important thing. If the air is not doing what it needs to be doing, then the tongue's just going to be struggling. Okay, let's start on low D. 1, 2. Okay, good. Now, the next thing, and this is always a fun transition I've noticed with students working on this, is putting the tongue and the fingers together while double tonguing can really mess with your mind because you have this fairly new tongue motion that you're doing, and then coordinating it with the fingers. You start thinking about things, and it's sort of like eating with a fork. You start thinking about it, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, where's my mouth? And we have to practice that and get it to feel comfortable. So let's ratchet the speed down just a little bit, and we're going to do just 5-note scales. So starting on low E, and we'll just go up chromatically as written here, and we'll just do what's on the page. We won't go any higher for now, and just keep it nice and legato. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And we just keep on doing this until we're comfortable going over the break and doing all that fun awkward clarinet finger things. And then with exercise 5, we're gradually adding endurance to this. We're not going to do that right now because I want to take you to this exercise. So this is my daily maintenance exercise, sort of. I've kind of truncated it a little bit because it's long. Actually, yeah, the way I do this is it's the same exercise. It just gets broken up a bit. So this exercise helps me work on endurance, and it helps me work on speed. And it follows the premise of tension and release. We have some articulation, and then we have relaxation. articulation, relaxation, back and forth. So we're not overly taxing ourselves. So let's give this a shot, and maybe we'll go a little bit higher and see how things go, because that's going to get us to our next thing. Let's bump the tempo up. Let's try at 100. Now I know this is all really slow, but that's okay. We've got to master the tongue motion as we get faster. Okay, ready? Starting on low E. This is just going up chromatically, so don't overthink about it. 1, 2, 3. Oh, missed the high G. So when we get higher, it gets harder, right? Especially going over breaks like F sharp to G. And this is a perfect example of one of the biggest issues that we have when learning how to double tongue. And that is, it gets really uncomfortable and awkward and not great sounding when we get up above the staff. And specifically, it's when we start getting up above like E5, so fourth space E. And that comes down to tongue motion. So the thing that we notice the most is like where we have the glissy sound. And the simplest solution is that we're doing a little gliss, and that's tongue motion. Tongue motion, the tongue's moving too far forward. So one way well, we'll talk about problems and solutions here in a minute. But so we use this exercise to build range, to build speed. You do this over a range of tempos, and you follow it up with a little chromatic scale, as high as you're comfortable, so you can really work on endurance. And as Stefanie mentioned, these will all be available to you. So, and we can give you even more if you want it. We can make PDFs available. So we have some tips. Steph, you want to talk about tips? Stefanie cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Test.
Okay. So going slowly would probably be the biggest tip. Making sure that you're not going too fast so you can get used to these exercises. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. So obviously they're new to us, or if they're not, things to work on when you're refining them. Going between your single and your double tonguing back and forth, making sure they match. So with that exercise that we were just doing, maybe you could do do, goo, do, goo, do, and then repeat the same pitches, do, 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 back and forth, making sure that they match for evenness. A lot of times when we're starting double tonguing, I hear almost like a catch, like a ducka, 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 almost like you're getting a chainsaw ready or something, where it's just not as even. So alternating between single and double, back and forth, working on evenness so that it sounds the same and it sounds practical to use is a good tip. The exercise that we just played, obviously working on range extension. And as Josh was saying, it's going to probably sound bad before it sounds good. But don't get discouraged. If you quit, you know what? It's never going to get better. But if you just have at it and do it every day as part of your warm up, even if you spend 5 minutes on it every day, you're going to see tremendous improvement over time. But if you always ignore it or just work on it occasionally, you're not going to have that build in your progression and seeing improvement. It's very much like working out or anything else that we practice. A little bit of consistency every day is going to really show a lot of growth and improvement. Is there a difference in starting on do or goo? I use do goo because it feels very comfortable, like starting as a single articulation, because I use do normally for my articulation. I'll let Josh answer that in the chat, possibly if he has any pedagogical reason of starting with do versus goo. Maybe the air attack is not as solid. I'll let him speak to that. So adding the scales to your routine, that's probably the next step after you've worked on these preliminary exercises. As we were talking about, getting your fingers to move while tonguing is a challenge. Oftentimes I find when people are first learning this, they're practicing it too fast and their fingers are ahead of the tongue. So if you can work on it slowly, making sure your fingers and tongue are actually working together and then gradually increasing the speed, that's going to be very helpful. Legato is very important too. I like to think about maybe like a mumbling. You don't have to be so clear with the duh and the guh, but more focus on the vowel, like the oo, do goo, do goo. It's almost like you're tired or you're slurring your speech. You want to be very efficient with the tongue so you can go faster. Do goo, 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 do goo. If I'm too much on the duh, guh, or do goo, do goo, do goo, it's going to sound aggressive and you'll hear it, especially in the altissimo register. It'll just be a little too aggressive and you might hear some of those funks in the articulation, or it'll sound like bad double tonguing instead of just, oh, wow, that's really fast tonguing. Earplugs. That's really helpful to hear the back syllable. Think about the tongue in a rocking motion. Whenever you're rocking back for the goo, we tend to hit pretty hard when we're first learning. It's just like when we learn new notes on the clarinet, we exaggerate the finger motion. And those earplugs are going to help us refine how much we actually have to touch. And you don't have to hit the back of the mouth very hard, the roof of the mouth. It's just a light touch. So those earplugs, when you have them in, you can feel that happening. That's really helpful. I already said alternate between single and double, and making sure that your speeds are also good, that you don't have a limit of, oh, I can only single tongue to 130 and then my double tongue starts at 150. You need to be able to match ranges. So maybe be able to double tongue in the 130s and the 140s and the 120s or 100, be able to double tongue slowly so that if you had to go back and forth in a passage, that it is seamless and it matches really well. Also, the biggest tip, be patient. This is something that will take about a year or two before you feel comfortable playing it in front of people. And I know that seems like a lot of time, but it's true, especially going over the break and getting into the altissimo registers, being able to control the technique and feeling confident in a performance. I'd say probably 2 years of consistent practice.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate the importance of patience, and I see this a lot where you don't have the immediate return. It's like, oh, I can do that now, and then you don't want to practice it anymore because it doesn't sound good. But this is one of those things where if you really want it to be a tool in the toolbox and something that you can just pull out anytime without having to, it's like, well, I need to practice this double tonguing so I can do this. Then, just a little bit of time every day. And then eventually it will be, it'll be second nature. It'll be easy. And you won't have to worry about learning the technique for the rep. If the rep calls on it, then you can, say, yeah, I got that tool. Let's go. And I mean, it can be frustrating. Not gonna lie at all. When I was learning, I started learning when I was in high school and really started getting into it in my undergrad. And there was a point where, especially with range, like hit G above the staff, and it's like, this does not sound good. I do not like this. This is really frustrating. And just kept on pushing and kept on pushing. And eventually it's like, it was like almost overnight where something clicked. and my tongue was relaxing and I was just getting out of the way, and then range was never a problem again. But you have to push through it.
Right. And the time it takes to learn how to be relaxed when you're doing something new, that takes a while, right?
Yeah.
And can you go back to the page with the exercises for a second? So I think it's really important to think about this in like, Josh was talking about tension and relaxation, and knowing these exercises have 16th notes and then a quarter note, or 16th notes and then a tie. It's very important that your tongue gets that break. Okay. It's like doing intervals and running really fast and then recovering, intervals, running fast and then recovering. And it's the tongue is a muscle, just, or it's 9 muscles, as we were saying. It's just like anything else you do, it's speed work and agility work. So you need the breaks. Okay. And also the endurance question in the chat earlier, you're not going to be able to do this for half an hour in the first sitting. You're going to get tired. So I would say try 5 minutes a day and then build your time there. You can actually do more damage if you are trying to do it all day long and it's not working and you get frustrated and mad. So take breaks and step away from it, and your body will learn how to relax with these new syllables.
Yeah, and really just enjoy the opportunity to learn something new. Um, in 2020, when everything got canceled, um, I I really needed something to do, something like I wanted to learn something, and I had never taken the time to learn how to slap tongue. And poor Stephanie had to deal with a lot of very frustrating sounds coming out of my instrument, but it eventually worked its way. I got it figured out, and could do it, and it was not quick. It was not quick, as she can say. It was not quick. Um, but that feeling, that feeling of accomplishment is, you're learning something new, is it's very rewarding and motivating. So, you take those opportunities, and don't think of them as a high stress thing. Think of them as, I'm going to learn how to do this, and it will take as long as it needs to take for me to master it.
Right, right. Well, should we move forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I need to. So we have this little chart for troubleshooting, and the problems that we have here they're obviously not the only problems that could ever occur, but they're the problems that we see the most often. And we just wanted to take a moment to kind of go through these, and again, this will be available for you all to come back to later. Uh, Double tongue is supposed to be fast, right? And sometimes it's not, and that is usually because way too much effort is being exerted, trying to make things too short. The tongue flopping around like way too much, or just, the simple issue is that we're just not practicing enough, or not. Actually, enough is not the right word. We're not practicing consistently, uh, and so solutions are just, focusing on the air. As I mentioned before, the air is so critical. Your tongue touches the reed, and with a really legato articulation, doesn't even really stop the reed. Then for the back articulation, it just bumps the air. Don't think of it as like a hard stop. We don't want do goo do goo. We're not ever going to do that for double tonguing. Um, and just, minimizing that variance in vowel shape. That'll minimize how much tongue motion there is. Uneven, as Stephanie was mentioning, dooka 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 dook. That's also very common, and it's again, it's aggressiveness with the articulation, where the back of the tongue's just getting stuck on the roof of the mouth because you're pressing into it, as opposed to just gliding by it. Doo-goo, 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 as opposed to doo-goo, doo-goo, doo-goo. As soon as you speed that up, it's going to get this swing to it. And coming back down to a slow tempo can be really helpful for this, because you learn how to relax, and you learn how to move the tongue in a way that does minimal work. Limited range. This is probably the most common issue, and the tongue just moves in a way that changes the voicing. And when you get up into this above the staff and you get that little qui sound, it's a mini gliss. It's the same tongue motion that we use to create a gliss. And that's the arch of the tongue coming forward, the back of the tongue coming forward. It feels like a balloon opening up in your throat. And we have to minimize that. And that takes a little bit of practice to figure out how you can move your tongue without changing that. And it comes back to minimizing the vowel shape change. Yeah, cat at the house is, she's not happy at the moment. And that's gonna affect the range. So the gliss effect between articulation is very much related to the limited range. In that the tongue is it's usually doing too much work, and it's usually shifting forward for the articulation. Whereas we want this rocking motion where it doesn't shift forward. Tongue finger coordination is limited. Most of the time, it's because of the fingers. When we start building our speed, we're often articulating, moving note passages at rates that are beyond what we have single tongued, and our fingers just they're not ready for that, and that's okay. It multiple articulation gives you the opportunity to really focus on evenness with the fingers, because if it's not even and you're tonguing it, it gets very noticeable. So if you're having problems with unevenness just on a single note, that can cause problems too. But if you're double tonguing on a single note, and it's super even, and then when you put it with the fingers and it's a mess, it's probably your fingers. So slow things down and address tongue finger coordination on a daily basis. And Stefanie was mentioning that using earplugs. There was a student a long time ago. He had the click from his tongue touching the roof of the mouth was so loud you could hear it from across the room. That's very unusual, but it being up close, most of the time you can hear a little bit of a click, and we have to avoid that. And there's always going to be a little bit of a click, but it can be soft enough that no one can hear it. And using earplugs can sensitize yourself to that sound and make it more noticeable. And it's the tongue just pressing too hard onto the palate, and you end up with that as you release the air. And again, we don't want to just completely stop the air. We don't need to at these speeds. It's more of a, like, the tongue is almost just like bouncing off the roof of the mouth. Okay, so we were gonna. Stefanie, do you have anything else to offer here?
No, I think we're ready for breakout rooms.
Okay, so we were going to split up into some breakout rooms and try some stuff. If you all wanted to, like, if you're having any problems or you want to demonstrate anything, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions, you can reach out to us via email. And again, this is going to be available to you, so you don't have to worry about writing it down. Our email addresses are obnoxiously long, but yeah. So let's split up into some breakout rooms, and then we can talk and dig into some stuff.